Hey everyone, how's it going? Uh, it's been a while since I talked about The Walking Dead. It's been over a year now since I made those first couple of Walking Dead videos. And despite having said basically everything that I think could ever be said about The Walking Dead, they continued to make more comic books for some reason. So I thought now would be a good time to have a look at what's happened in the last year in the Walking Dead series, franchise, whatever it is. Um, because it's still good. It's still really, really good. It's one of the comic books that I still read religiously, which is really impressive after 16 years or whatever, and 165 issues as I record this. Um, yeah, they recently released 165 like this week. Or last week. Yeah. And it's good. It's pretty good. Um, and of course, they have their shows and other media as well, which are pretty much garbage still. I don't really like the TV show, as I've mentioned. They introduced Negan this season, um, but he can't swear, which is so stupid. So, such a painful limitation, I think, on Kirkman's Negan. So, that's painful. There's also like just all these random twists happening on The Walking Dead. As I don't actually watch it, but I've been reading the reviews, and there was an episode where they met like a group of trash people, which sounds bizarre. And apparently they're maybe going to turn into the Whisperers later on, but we'll see. Um, and they have like a second TV show now, the Fear the Walking Dead came out within the last, well, maybe 2 years. Anyway, that it really is so very cynical, I think, that AMC thinks that they can just create another TV show within the Walking Dead universe with just a bunch of random characters they've created fit for purpose. Um, I think The Walking Dead, as much as it could be about anyone, isn't about anyone, if that makes any sense. It's very much a story about the House of Grimes and, the ragtag survivors around them. And I think without uh the character, like without Rick and Carl, and to a lesser extent Laurie and Shane and all the other original characters that we met from the beginning, the story just wouldn't have worked. Or, without characters as good. And as far as I can tell from Fear the Walking Dead, they really don't have anyone nearly that dynamic. But whatever. The corporate side of The Walking Dead was always terrible. But I have a lot of respect for the comic book still. They still really respect their audience, so they never sold out. As much as Image really isn't an independent in any way, they're a huge company. Um, The Walking Dead still has like 3 or 4 pages at the back dedicated to letters every month, and recently like every week because they've released like 3 issues of The Walking Dead in the past month, which is bananas. I don't know how Charlie Adlard draws so quickly, but the man's clearly a machine. Plus, he's been drawing other stuff too, which we'll come to. Before we get to that, there was also the Walking Dead, the Alien comic book last year, which I think was the first Walking Dead comic book to be written and drawn as well by a different team. It was written by Kevin Vaughn. Vincent Vaughn. It was written by Kevin Vaughn. I can't remember who drew it. Um, and I won't tell you what the twists are in it, but it was set in, I can't remember exactly where, but it was set in Europe. And it was connected to The Walking Dead in a really interesting way. It was only a one shot. It was digital as well, so it had a very different sort of layout, and it was really good, really good. At the time, I thought it was one of the best issues of The Walking Dead in ages. I really did think the series was petering off uh, around the 150 mark after the time jump, which was 2 years, but unofficially I mean, they in the letters page, the one of the editors accidentally said the time skip after they defeat Negan was 2 years, but it was not meant to. They weren't actually meant to tell you how long it was. So everyone knows how long it was, but we all got to pretend that we don't. But I really thought that it was petering off a bit there because there was no real conflict, and as nice as it was to see everyone in peacetime for a change, it was it was a bit. I was just wondering what was going to happen next, and if next would be a repeat of everything. But it has picked up recently. Starting with, I think, well, we'll talk about Eugene on the radio. There seems to be this time someone actually on the other end of a radio call, and Eugene has been keeping it a secret from everyone else. And I wonder if these new survivors are going to be like a larger group than we've met before. And I wonder if they're going to be even more civilized. It's going to be kind of like Christopher Columbus meeting the American Indians when they eventually do come in contact, which is pretty tantalizing, I think. I think it's going to be bigger than it certainly appears to be right now. I think what's going to happen is this new group is going to make Rick and his surrounding neighbors look quite petty and quite small. And inevitably, probably Rick will take over all the new territories, but we'll see. There's also Carl has been a pretty prominent character in recent stories. He got laid, which is good for Carl. He slept with a girl called Lydia, who was the daughter, I believe, of Alpha, the head of the Whisperers, which is, I mean, it's a bit of a weird romance. It's a bit of a strange thing to have happened. I mean, surely, I guess they've gotten used to rotting corpses, but, this girl was wearing the skin of another human, and I don't know, maybe that turns Carl on, I guess. Bit weird, but, good for Carl. The big thing that's happened in the last year was the 6-issue story, The Whisper War, which ended a month ago quite anticlimactically, and we'll get to that. But what I really liked about it anyway, while it was going on, was the 16 panel pages that they set out, that they used anyway, because you could fit more story into it, obviously, if you have 16 panels instead of like 9 or, whatever they usually do in The Walking Dead. I'm a shill for good panel design and, using the space nicely. And 16 panel pages, they're nice. Yeah, I like them. I like them a lot. Even if the story that they were telling wasn't actually that substantial in the end. It was ultimately it was a pretty linear conflict, I think, between the Whisperers, who were on the back foot after, spoiler, Negan killed Alpha in this crazy issue, where he killed Alpha to prove his loyalty to Rick, which was great, and he sort of neutralized most of the Whisperers, so the actual Whisper War conflict turned out to be pretty short-lived and underwhelming, but it has opened the gate to other stories. The big story, I guess, is actually Negan's reform. He's wily, that Negan. He basically convinced Rick to let him help deal with the Whisperers. Actually, I can't remember exactly how he got out, but anyway, everyone thought he was going to betray them to the Whisperers. Instead, he went and murdered Alpha, brought her head back to Rick to prove his loyalty. Rick was impressed, but still didn't want to trust him entirely, which is fair enough. And I think some of the other characters aren't fully aware of these new developments. Maggie, for instance, I don't think she knows that Rick is going easier on Negan. I don't know if she'll be too happy about it if they get a chance to talk about it at some point. But yeah, there's been a really good focus on Negan recently. There was recently he's obsessed with his bat Lucille, and in one of the issues recently it broke when he was fighting the walkers. He smashed it, which by itself, normally I just roll my eyes, but in the next issue he buried it, and he apologized to it, and he said, "I'm sorry that I named a stupid baseball bat after you." And it turns out that the baseball bat was named after his wife, who died of cancer in the Here's Negan tie-in story, which is a story being written by Kirkman and drawn by Charlie Adlard, and being published in four-page spurts. Basically, every issue of the premium Image Plus magazine comes with 4 pages of Here's Negan, which purports to tell his actual backstory, and it's been pretty great so far. There have been 11 issues of Image Plus, and everyone has had Here's Negan in it. And it's gonna finish in issue 16. So hopefully it'll be collected as an individual comic book at that point. But it's been pretty interesting. Turns out he was like a high school gym teacher, and he cheated on his wife. And it shows you, his reaction to the outbreak at first, which is pretty cool. It's very good at, humanizing Negan, because he's such a charismatic player, and he's so he never seemed quite human, did he? He always seemed quite dangerously inhuman. That's a terrible description. He was godlike, really. He was next level stuff. He was just he didn't have any empathy, and he was he was quite unlike any other character that I think had been encountered. In this book, it's impressive that they've written a backstory for a character like that is actually believable, and believably charts his progress from being a regular person to this maniacal sadist. And yet it's also impressive that while being a maniacal sadist, he can still be, like, I can actually empathize with him. They've done a hell of a job on Negan recently. In one of the recent issues, Rick and Negan, even the most recent issue, 165, Rick and Negan are playing buddy-buddy, which is, it's a classic comic book thing, Batman teaming up with the Joker. Really, it's ridiculous, but it's great. And I hope that, I think it fully justifies the decision to keep him alive at the end of All Out War, now that he's proven to be far more interesting than he was even back then. I know he had a cult following from, since basically he appeared and killed Glenn, but even then, he wasn't as interesting as he's turning out to be right now. So I'm really glad that they didn't kill him off. But having talked about the human drama, I think the thing that gets missed, the things that I always seem to forget about The Walking Dead, ironically, is the walkers themselves, which I think right now are more redundant than they have ever been. It's been quite a while since Rick and team realized how easy it is to deal with the walkers. They've had strategies to deal with them, and they've been on top of their game for ages. It hasn't troubled them whatsoever. But after the Whisper War, what happens is, in one final act of defiance, Beta, who was leading the Whisperers after Alpha was killed, basically set his sea of walkers, which is how they refer to the walker cohort they were leading. He set his sea of walkers at, I think it's Alexandria. I think that was the one. And they completely overran it, in which, Negan and Rick and the other main cast, not Maggie, but I think Andrea was there, and I think Dwight was there as well. Yeah, some of the main players were there. And the problem is, I think that they've done this before. They've done this story where they go into a place and they settle in the place, and then a bunch of walkers appear and they overrun the place. There was almost this exact story. I can't remember what it was called, but it was back before the time skip. It was like 6 issues as well. And it seems like in order to keep escalating it, all they do is just add more zombies. It's just like, this is just the same story as before, only there are more zombies now, there are more walkers now. And surely you can't keep doing that forever. What happens the next time they want to do this story? Is it just like, there are more zombies this time? The walkers are so redundant, because obviously they're going to deal with them. It's been done so many times in this comic book, and it's so boring now that I think the comic book has matured to the point where they could actually get rid of them. In fact, at the end of 165, they actually there's sort of a reference to the idea that nature may be working to reclaim the world from the walkers. I mentioned before that Al Beta's guys were described as a sea of walkers, and they dealt with them by driving them into the actual sea, using the noise generated by the waves bashing against the rocks to attract the walkers and drive them out to sea and kill them all. So it seems like there could be a time in Walking Dead future where there aren't any more walkers, or at least, there are still walkers because they're still all diseased, but like the majority of them have been dealt with, and there are just a few stragglers left. And that would be really interesting. I can't think of too many zombie stories like this where they go full apocalypse and then they recover everything. So, I mean, that could be. I don't think The Walking Dead actually needs walkers anymore, and they're more of a hindrance to the story than anything. The story at this point is about, reclaiming civilization. I think, surely I can't be the only one who is tired of reading about, more and more larger groups of walkers attacking camps over and over again. I think it's time we moved on from that, and hopefully they do. I think that would be really interesting. One thing I have noticed, and one thing I was going to criticize it for, is that because there is a larger cast of characters now, and they're set across many different camps, I actually have a hard time recognizing who some people are still. Like in, there was a 2-year time skip, and a lot of people's appearances changed during that skip, which didn't help. And then there were new survivors introduced, I think even before issue 150. And I still don't know any of their names. I don't know anything about any of them. It makes the book feel less personal, I suppose. It could also be that I'm not reading as many issues. I didn't read Walking Dead from the very beginning when it was first being published. So I read a lot of them all at once, and I've been reading monthly or whenever they release them ever since. But yeah, I guess I've lost a bit of zest for the series because there are so many new characters and they're so hard to remember. But, I was also going to say that it seems like they are afraid to kill off major characters now, but then something happened which maybe signals a change, which could be interesting. In 165, I won't say exactly what it is, but yeah, I think there's always a storm brewing in The Walking Dead. I hope that this is a good one, though. I hope that in the next 50 issues or so, something big happens. And I think maybe it is time for, or very nearly time for, Rick to be given his last rites. I know this isn't a particularly contrarian view, but I never really liked Rick very much. He's an arsehole. He had his position of authority or perceived authority as an ex-policeman, and he's always abused that position for personal gain. He is incredibly selfish, and an incredibly difficult man, I have to say. He's probably been the lesser of most of the evils he's encountered, but at the same time, I do feel like the story could survive without him, and I would applaud the bravery it would take to kill him off. I'm sure that there is a plan of succession lined up, because the narrative so far has been about the ascendance of the House of Rick Grimes, and with every rise, there has to be a subsequent fall. Unquestionably, there's going to be a huge fall for Rick, one day. And I think it is time. I think there are enough interesting support characters, and admittedly I don't know some of their names, but there are enough support characters, and the redemption of Negan, I think, is such that perhaps even Negan could take over leading the group at some point in the near future. Wouldn't that be interesting? If he manages to redeem himself for everyone, or I don't know if Maggie goes their separate ways, or maybe if enough people can't remember what he did. Or maybe, in light of recent events, Rick finally cracks and Carl takes over. I don't know. I don't know what the succession plan is, but I guarantee you Rick is not going to be around forever. And I think that even though it's been going pretty well recently, the book could still use an injection. I think maybe that comes from finally seeing Rick's fall. So, I mean, obviously, I think you can tell by the way I'm talking about. I think you can tell by the way that I'm talking about it that I'm still pretty interested in this book. It's, you have to give this book props. Like, it's, as I said before, Image is not an independent publisher. Not really. They're just not Marvel or DC. But I mean, to build an empire out of a story like this is pretty impressive, and it's really impressive that the comic book, even now, is so consistently excellent. And I think that I hope that The Walking Dead will be the comic book to lead us out of the zombie apocalypse story craze in the near future. If it does that, I will be eternally grateful to never read another story about a zombie again. But those are just my impressions. What do you think? Let me know, and I'll talk to you guys later.